naar Engelen. Welcome, Timothy. Timothy, I wonder, what set you off on this research for angels?
I had never really thought much about angels. I grew up in a Christian home and I went to graduate theological school, was even a pastor for a number of years, and yet never really had to ask what an angel might have to do with me, what the angels might have to do with my daily life, and I wanted to address that. The other reason I wrote it is in the whole of the Western world, and certainly in my country, the United States, the interest in angels is phenomenal. People are hungry for contact with the divine, and they're turning to angels. A friend of mine calls it an ache for cosmic specialness. And people are longing to know that they're not alone in the universe, and I wanted to give some guidance, because not all that's out there about angels is, in my mind, is true or right.
One of the stories that I like best from your book was the one about Sam Cathy, especially because it was very specific and concrete.
Yes.
And we went over to him, and this is what he told us. Dit is routine voor Sam Cathy. Al meer dan 25 jaar geleden begon hij als jonge predikant bij de Southern Baptists. Al snel groeide het verlangen om een bediening als evangelist op zich te nemen. Rondreizend door heel Noord-Amerika verzorgde hij zo op uitnodiging van kerken uit deze denominatie werkelijk overal en nergens evangelisatiecampagnes. Dat betekende veel vliegen, weken weg van huis en de nodige zorgen en eenzaamheid. Sam is een van die mensen die vertellen van de ontmoeting met een engel. Maar waar veel verhalen misschien wat vaag en ongrijpbaar lijken, is zijn verhaal er een met een aantal opvallend concrete gebeurtenissen die verstrekkende gevolgen bleken te hebben.
My first year in evangelism had a wife and 3 little children and a lot of fear. And it was not lack of trust in God so much as it was just the unknown. I was young in the ministry, and had a young family, and God called me to leave my family, my wife and 3 children, and to strike out on my own and just hold meetings, getting home every few weeks for a few days. And it was quite traumatic. And I was out in California preaching right next to Disney World. And Disneyland, I think it is out there. And on Saturday night, I called home to see how things were. And my wife told me that our oldest daughter, who was 9 at the time, was at that time in the hospital, diagnosed with appendicitis, high fever, terribly sick. And so I told the church about it that night, made arrangements to go home. I was living in Detroit, Michigan at the time. And made my plane reservation. The only plane I could get on was at 2:30, 2:40 in the morning, something like that, which was quite a differential. In Detroit time, it was almost daylight by then. And so I got on the plane very, very, very worried and very insecure and very bothered, trying to pray and trying to believe God and trying to trust God as much as I knew and as far as I'd been with the Lord at that time. Well, I got on the plane. Very sparsely populated was the plane, and I always sit against the bulkhead, the screen, the curtain right here leading into first class. And I looked up there, dark, nobody sitting up there. So when the stewardess came up to me, I said, "Do you mind if I sit in that first class section?" Now, I never put Reverend or Doctor on my tickets. I just put Sam Cathy. Never tell anybody I'm a preacher, just me. And she said I could not go up there because they didn't have a stewardess up there. And I said, "Well, I'll just rest here in this seat, then do the best I can." She walked away, and the minute she walked away, another lady came through that curtain. This girl was dressed in red, trimmed in blue. The girl that came through from that first class section was dressed in blue, trimmed in red. And when she came through that curtain, she looked at me and said, "Come up here with me." And I got up and followed her up there. She asked me would I like something to eat, and I said, "Well, yes." And so she brought some refreshments, and I began to nibble on them, and she began to talk. I never said a word about me. I didn't say a word. Never said who I was, what I was doing, and for certain I never said a word about my daughter, though my heart was breaking. and bothered about the fact my wife had to take care of that, and that I was supposed to be in Atlanta, Georgia the next night. Really bothered.
What was she talking about?
God, and about the glory of God, the sovereignty of God, and the providence of God, and the power of God, and the power of prayer, the power of trust, the power of faith, the providence of God, how that the steps of the righteous are ordered of God, just incessantly. And it wasn't babble. I was so intrigued by it. I just sat back in the chair and just gazed at her and listened. It was incredible what I was hearing. Nothing I hadn't heard before. Nothing I didn't believe. But it was mental. I had never heard it before in my life. After about, hour and 45 minutes of that, and it wasn't obtrusive and it wasn't boring, delightful. At that point, she got very formal with me. She stiffened and she was standing like right here, fully extended her arm and touched my shoulder. And she said, "O thou man of God, Nola is all right." And she turned and walked away and went through that curtain. Probably took me 3-4 seconds to get my composure, because I had not said Nola was sick. I had not called her name. I had not said I was a preacher. Nothing. I hadn't said anything.
You were completely...
I hadn't said anything. Oh, baffled. I was blown away. I jumped up, ran through the curtain to find her, and of course she was gone. And the other girl, the girl dressed in red, remember?
Yeah.
She put her hands on her hips. She said, "Where have you been? We've been looking for you. We were worried about you." I said, "I was sitting right up in the first class." She said, "I told you not to go up there," that sort of stuff. And I said, "Well, the head stewardess took me up there." She said, "I'm the head stewardess." I said, "No, I'm talking about the girl dressed in blue with the red trim. We don't have anybody like that." I said, "Yeah, she took me up there and fed me some sandwiches and pop." She said, "We don't have any food on this plane." When we walked back up there sat the remains. She said, "Where did that come from?" I said, "I'm trying to tell you." And I told her the story, and they began to look. I began to look. One of the 3 pilots or navigators or whatever, whomever, came out. We looked everywhere, and of course she was not to be found. My conclusion was that God sent an angel to minister to me and my family, and it made a profound, profound difference in our life.
What happened to your daughter? She told you...
Plane landed.
Okay.
Plane landed. And that was back in the days when we didn't have the conveyors to walk on. We had to come down the steps onto the tarmac. And she was standing back out there just beyond the retainer. And I came down off the plane and walked toward her.
You mean your wife?
Mm-hmm, yeah. And she said, "You're not going to believe this, but the hospital just called. They ran another blood test because the fever was gone, and there's no trace of appendicitis. They said for us to come and get Nola and take her home." And the beautiful part about all of that is that so many of my friends just didn't believe my story. Now remember, she was 9 years old when she had that appendicitis. I believe she was 28 when she had a complete hysterectomy. When the hysterectomy was over, the doctors came out. Of course, my wife was there with our daughter. The doctors came out and said, "Mrs. Kathy," now these are not the exact words, this is what they said. "Mrs. Kathy, we cannot find a surgical scar on your daughter's body indicating an appendectomy, nor any other scar where it could have been done. But while we were in there, we thought we'd take the appendix out as we normally do. And where the appendix is supposed to be is a perfect surgical scar, and the appendix is gone." So as far as I'm concerned, what God did is He confirmed what He did for me, and I think God did that for the sake of others. Now that is irrefutable evidence that something happened. I mean, you can reject, or anybody else can reject the particulars of my story, but you cannot reject the evidence that everybody experienced and had happened to them.